Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Nate Hilton, and in the first official preseason podcast of the season, I'd like to welcome back AUDL champions and co-coaches of the New York Empire, Anthony Nuñez and Charlie Hoppes. How's it going, coaches?
Hey, good. Dan, how are you?
Yeah, good to be back.
Excited.
Well, yeah, before we get to 2023, I know that's where everyone wants us to talk about, but we're going to focus actually, even before we go back to 2022, I want to focus a little bit on the offseason, about the downtime. I feel like we spend so much time asking players about how they use their off seasons to unplug and the workouts they're doing and trying to figure out all that stuff. But what do coaches do during the off season, especially, Anthony, as we mentioned last year, how you didn't watch the championship game from the year before? So how many times, I guess, now have you watched the championship game that the Empire won last season?
It's on a constant loop in my office. So, no, I watched it a couple of times after, but once I hit September, I started really focusing in on that was last year. It's time to think about what's happening for my coaching career for the following season. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of watching it, enjoying it, and then I give myself until the end of the month usually for anything, and then get started on the next thing.
I went longer than Nuñez for sure. I reveled in it for a few weeks. It really felt like in a lot of ways a culmination of a long journey, and so and not just for me, but for my family that supports me, and my partnership with Nuñez and all the different people that have impacted me. So I reveled in it. I really did, especially with no immediate AUDL stuff coming up. I really did enjoy the time. Ate some salsa out of the championship trophy. That was good. Best salsa I've ever had. But yeah, now that the off season is really, if anything, we're winding down now. I spent a lot of time trying to think about, where we can get better on the field, X's and O's wise, how we can improve culture, all the sorts of stuff that we're going to be responsible for coming up into this next season. So that's also exciting. That's a puzzle unto itself. Repeating is exceedingly hard in the AUDL. And so, yeah, it's a brand new challenge that I'm really looking forward to.
Well, yeah, it must be said that for as good as last year was, according to the expectations are already on this current season or 2023. So we're going to get to that in a bit. But I do want to, again, revel and bask in the glory that was 2022. And some of, because when you go undefeated the way the Empire did, when you win the championship, in a really dominant effort in the championship game, in particular, 22-14 over Chicago, I think people don't get to see and know behind the scenes some of the difficult choices that were made, some of the moments where it didn't feel like that suit of armor was as tight as it was, right? It felt more like, instead of Iron Man 1 in 2005, it felt a bit more like, no spoilers here, but Iron Man in the last one, in what was it, Infinity War or whatever it was. So, yeah. So as far as the little things that the fans don't know, what can you let them know about the process of how the scout worked from week to week, and as much as you share, because I assume that this coming season, a lot of that procedure is going to be very similar. So whatever you can share about the process of how from week to week throughout the Monday through Friday, you prepared for each and every opponent. I guess with the caveat being, obviously championship weekend was a bit different. You had less than 24 hours to prepare for Chicago, but as far as everybody else.
Yeah, we had a pretty regimented schedule. Nuñez and I talking just about every day doesn't count, so that's outside of that schedule. But we typically had our advanced scouts come in and tell us who we were playing upcoming, some of the trends that they noticed, so that we could look for that as we were watching film ourselves after our following week's game. Monday, we had a leadership meeting with captains, coaches, the scouts, and Matt Stevens. and from there we sort of built out the week, the game plan, um, all of that, the roster, all those things.
Yeah, it's no big secret also that um, Charlie, Matt Stevens, myself, like we all watch a ton of Ultimate, especially in the ADL. So we watch a lot of video, like film of the teams that we're going to be playing. Usually that's on like Sunday/Monday, and then once we have that leadership meeting, we already kind of have it in our minds like what's going to happen. But like we watch almost every team in the AADL during like the week as it is, just to pick up new things, and we're we're all very much students of the game, and that's kind of makes the game planning a little bit easier for those Monday meetings.
So I'll ask you then, what prior to the playoffs, even throughout the course of the season, what were some of the most important things that you learned as the season went on? Because like again, I think people take for granted the fact that the Empire, yeah, they felt like a favorite, but there were still things along the way, and we're going to get into those individual decisions in a second. So I don't want you to mention the names Ben Yacht and Jeff Babbitt just yet, but as far as some of the other things throughout the season and moments and important things you might have learned, even from other teams, like even from watching other film and saying, okay, this is how you're going to have to win in 2022.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we tend to look at in film, or at least I do, is I don't try to predict the future. Like that's an important thing to remember, is you're never going to be able to predict what your opponent's going to do, but you can look at like trends that players have or tendencies, different basic strategies that you get overlooked a lot of the times because you want to be paying attention to detail as much as possible when you're watching film. And usually what I do is when I watch film, I watch it all the way through the first time. And then a second time is with stopping and note taking and trying to be a little bit more paying attention to the little things. And that's really what something I learned is like just watching the other teams play is great, and watching it all the way through without interruption is a great way to get your mind started on things, and then really work your mental energy as much as possible the second time, maybe even a third time, depending upon the team.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like around the league, there are so many different characters and so many different guys to watch that I know I told people to do this before, and I seriously mean this. Like, I would tell a younger player who may not have the best size, right? And maybe you've got a good wingspan, but you're still only 5'8", 5'9", watch a whole game of Ben Katz. So whenever every D point, just watch Ben. Don't watch anybody else. Like know where the disc is, and then watch Ben Katz for an entire game, and just do that. And then you're gonna, oh, this guy's brilliant. I can't do that. I mean, not that. That's not what I want you to come away with. Just maybe you learn a lesson or two from the way he poaches and the way he goes about his mark. But yeah, I mean, now even beyond Katz, like with with thinking that 2022 was just like the revenge tour for the Empire from 2021, right? A losing championship game wasn't necessarily the case because there were so many new faces that joined the team who had prior ADO experience as well that you had to fit into that culture and kind of make them say, hey, I know you guys weren't here when we lost in 2021, but we need you to be angry. We need you to be ready for that revenge, and we need you to be as hungry as everybody else is here for this. So we're talking in particular about John Randolph, Antoine Davis, Charles Weinberg, Ethan Fortin, among others. So how much tweaking was required due to the major roles that had been to previous stops and now are coming in, and you're saying, hey, this is basically part 2 of last season, and we need you to buy into all of this, and you've got to fit your role.
Yeah, I think, to that end, I don't think that we ever really viewed 2022 as part 2. We viewed it as its own thing. And I don't know that we really felt like we were on a revenge tour. It really was a lot of us trying to challenge ourselves to be just as good as we could be. And that is such a coach speak cliche, but I think early in the season you saw a couple wins that looked familiar from the 2021 season, right? We had a close game against DC, we had a close game against Philly, and then we had a start of a close game against Boston, and during that Boston game, we kind of hit the Jets at the end of the first quarter into the second quarter there, and I think it really awakened us that like, oh, there's ceilings that we can push beyond, and the best games that we're going to get, oftentimes, not no disrespect to our opponents, but we're going to be within our own practices, and games became a lot of a celebration and attempt to see just how far we could push ourselves to be excellent in those games. And so, that was not necessarily the mindset in 2021. It was really a different mindset for us, and it led to some, again, like really joyful moments and some big wins. And we didn't have those close games as frequently as we did in 2021 because we just kept our foot on the gas the whole way through, just sort of because we could, because we should, and for the joy of it. And that was a great culture shift for us.
Well, I'm going to add an asterisk on the idea of revenge. But I will say, since we are celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the New York Empire, that the first half against Toronto in Toronto, going back to that felt a little bit like franchise revenge for a lot of seasons when Toronto was number one over the Empire. And there was something in that first half. It just felt like it was 7 years or 6.5 years or whatever it was of something that was already boiling. And maybe not the players themselves or you, the coaches, like you weren't there for those, but there was something about Mike and Ryan Drost and Kat. There was something in their eyes those days about Toronto and New York.
Well,
again, maybe if it wasn't happening, but just, I'm being light with it, but of course, yeah, a little bit of revenge, at least for franchise history.
Right. So one of the things that everybody said at the end of the game was like, we really wanted that. Like, we really wanted that large win.
Yeah.
I am going to take full credit on that win because my plane got delayed. I was flying in Saturday morning. My plane got delayed. I landed at 6:00 for the 7:00 start. I got there in time for us to be tied 5-5. And then after that, we pulled away by a lot. It was me bringing both my luck and also my award-winning smile to lead us to that success. And Charlie also got ejected that game, so there was also that.
I got ejected from that game. That was a very eventful game. When Nuñez got there, we went on a 20-3 run.
Right.
So that should tell you everything you need to know right there about Nuñez's impact.
We're just going to keep him in the locker room, I think, for the first 10 minutes of every game this season. I think for the first quarter, just keep him in the locker room.
Just unleash him. But Toronto was also honoring a lot of their stars of the past for that game. Yep. Many of the players that had put the hurt on the Empire organization for many, many years were in attendance, and I think that made it extra sweet for the guys. The Dross, Yacht, Jeff, Matt Stevens, all those guys that have been. I'm missing people for sure. Marquez, the guys that have been through it. Made it extra sweet for them for sure. We heard about it afterwards for sure.
Yeah, so now I think it is time to talk about the Benyat, Jeff Babbitt stuff, offense and defense swap from last season. So what can you tell listeners? Because I think even myself, not being completely in the know, because I'm not privy to, as much as people believe it, I'm not privy to all the reasons and decisions as to why certain things are made. And I think the perception around the league was that decision was made for XYZ reason. But what can you tell listeners about that process and that decision? And, because we talk a lot about how, Benyat just bought in and that became the narrative. But I think throughout the Empire, I keep hearing pushback on how that was just, Yacht's being unselfish or in this way or whatever it is about going from offense to defense. But yeah, what went into that decision and even the process involved in the thinking? Whatever you can tell that doesn't give away something for 2023. Sure.
We have a really collaborative leadership approach, Nuñez and I, and it was something that we talked about and bounced around with leadership, and but it's a big move, right? And Benyat is an important player and an important person to all of us, and To ask somebody to make a move like that is significant. Um, and uh, yeah, it was not a small ask, and really, I think like in the narrative, it's a big ask for Jeff Babbitt as well. Jeff
Right.
is a born defender. He's the premier defender. I think when you think of who's the most elite at just covering ground, just overall most elite defender, and to ask him to play offense, those were both sacrifices for both of these team leaders. And I don't know. I'll let Nunez talk to it a little bit, but I think in my mind it really was emblematic of what we're talking about. How can we push the team to higher heights? What does that look like? What does that mean for the people involved? Um, and we just didn't miss a beat.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you look at it on paper, it's a no-brainer in a way, right? Because you have two very dynamic cutters uh, who can fit in both offensively and defensively. Jeff is a phenomenal defender as well as a phenomenal offensive cutter and player. Ben is also a very strong offensive player who also has a great defensive mind as well. What it comes down to is the speed and the difference of the defensive lines and the offensive line. Jeff fit in perfectly with that offensive line because of the type of cutter that he is, the type of player that he is, and moving Ben over to defense made a lot of sense because it's a matchup nightmare off of a turn for any O-line defender, basically having to take the two-time MVP and try to cover them. On top of, you add in the fact that both are extremely smart players, and it helps like tremendously on that side of the disc too. If there's a turnover on offense, you have one of the best defenders in the league with Jeff over there helping out the offense on defense. And it's just a very easy swap when you start thinking about it. And on top of that, yeah, it does come down to both of them put their egos aside and wanted what was best for the team and what would create a winning environment. And that tells you a lot about those players and also the team.
Yeah, and just to put a cherry on top of it, Ben Yot, I think you could put him on most any line in the league and have that line dramatically uptick in terms of offensive efficiency because he's just going to get the disc. He's just going to make plays with it and away from it. And he's just going to have this gravity and he's just going to make everyone around him better. And so to plug that kind of counterattack into a D line without losing so much defense because of what a good defender he is. I mean, again, like Nuñez said, in terms of black and white, it was just like the right decision to make.
I made this point in one of the games at the like halftime interview. If you look at things from professional sports, a lot of the MVPs that have won, like for example, Bill Russell. Bill Russell wasn't somebody who was leading the league in scores or assists or anything like that, but he was leading the league in rebounds and blocks. And it was because of his defensive presence that the Celtics were winning, and which is also why he was winning all these MVPs over a Will Chamberlain who was leading the league in scoring or assists or the offensive scores. What it comes down to is Yacht makes a big impact on defense, and it's just an easy way for the team to win.
Well, of course, winning the championship, being undefeated, also validates the decision that you made as well, where everything makes sense. The numbers prove that that was the right move. That was the right decision. So, I guess to ask about that, I think all the attention again was on Yacht and Babbitt and that switch because again, I mean, you can argue that it's one of the biggest personnel decisions that have been made almost in AUDL history, considering that the Empire did wind up winning the title in an undefeated season. So, what were some of the other tweaks though? And now, again, if you're going to do them again this year, you can't give away any of that kind of stuff. But what was another tweak that casual fans didn't pick up on that maybe only watched the Empire Championship weekend that probably should have gotten more attention? Or one of those little things that you're proud of, like, hey, in this game, we decided to roster XYZ, or in this game, we made this choice, and that one paid off huge. Now, obviously, I don't want to lead you a little bit, but the Matt Johnson call, I think that's almost the first name I have to mention, inserting Matt Johnson into that 20 and having one of the best one-game performances in AUDL history for a rookie is a big one. So I'm not saying I'm going to take that one from you, but I mean, that was a moment. Being on the call for that game, that was enjoyable.
I have one, and then I'll just do one. But it was my favorite. We asked Mike Drost.
Damn it. Took mine.
This is a family-friendly podcast, Nuñez. We asked Mike Drost to handle it, and he is, in his age 33 season. We asked him to handle for the first time on a high-level team, and we asked him to help run the second D line, and that is a big ask in a lot of different ways. It's teaching him a new position all the way at that point in his career. He was excellent in that role. And it meant that we got a caliber of, one of the legendary defenders of the history of the league on our second D line to help anchor that, along with Ryan Holmes and occasionally his brother Ryan Drost and others. So it was a big move that really went a long way to making that second D line so formidable across the whole season. And I'm really proud of that one, and I'm really proud of Mike. I think that it's one of the unsung things of 2022's success.
So I am going to have to change my answer. And my answer is going to be Matt Stevens moving from offense to defense, and talking it through with him and trying to find what his niche on defense would be. And we truly did find it. He had a very strong defensive presence against some of the better players on the other team. And then on top of that, once again, similar to Yacht, when the disc turns, you have one of the best offensive cutters in the league and also of all time with the goal scoring there and being a presence on a break opportunity. And that line created more breaks. It had a higher break percentage, I think, than some of the other D lines, like D1 lines in the league, because of the veteran presence that we had there with Mike, with Matt, with Ryan, with Ryan Holmes. And it created opportunities for us to just keep piggybacking off of getting a double break rather than just having one break. And on top of that, again, it's the selflessness of these players that helps build and create what was 2022. And Matt Stevens saying, okay, you know what? We have like this all-star lineup on offense. I'm going to move to defense and I'm going to own it. And being successful at it was because Matt was 100% bought in on this team winning. So definitely.
I think it is a lesson there that, we can sum it up with a little catchphrase like you can teach an old Dross new tricks. I think it's right to say that, but I think in the case of Kat and Ryan and Mike Dross, who both been around since 2013, I think it's really easy for them to say, hey, I'm going to ride off on the sunset in my own terms. But instead they said, no, I want to keep winning and be a part of this organization at a high level. So I'm going to learn and do different things. You asked the all-time leader in Empire goals with 311. in Matt Cat Stevens to do something he had never done in the league really before. You could argue in the 2013-14 seasons, there was a lot of offense on defense kind of situations. Of course, turnovers a little higher in those years, but still, yeah, to take on a role and play high level defense, certainly. So, all right, a little bit quicker here as we do finish recapping the season and move on to what you have to look forward to this year. So against DC in the playoff game, I'll just ask one of you. So one of you answer, then I got another one about Carolina for the other ones. So you guys decide who wants DC, who wants Carolina to answer these next two questions. But for DC, how did you navigate the Breeze's second half little mini comeback there? Because again, the Empire never trailed. As much as it felt like DC had you by the ropes, the Empire never trailed in that game, and you won in regulation. It did take over a buzzer beater by a guy who was 6'7", but it was always in Empire control, if you will, in that game. But how did you handle that mini comeback in the second half?
You go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of that same belief that we talked about earlier, and now is where once you start repeating stuff, that's what becomes a cliche, right? But it was that belief in ourselves, that confidence in ourselves. We hadn't had a lot of close games before, but we'd felt pressure before. We'd felt pressure across the whole season, knowing that we were going to be getting every team's best shot, especially towards the end of the season. We knew DC is an excellent team. It wasn't surprising. We weren't alarmed to be forced into our plans B and C. That's a good team. Good teams are going to make you play your plans B and C. But we trusted that our plans B and C were good and strong. I thought that we managed the clock in the fourth quarter well. And we escaped with a win. We were in control of that game for most of it. I think some people forget that we were in a good position there, and some great clock management by them at the end of the third quarter really turned the game on its head and made it the classic that it was. So I think to put a bow on it, it was just that belief and confidence that plan B and C are rock solid too, and that we were going to get through that game. And that once we win those games in that way, moving forward, the confidence is there to continue.
Well, and speaking of that confidence and moving ahead to championship weekend, Carolina, Anthony, was there a concern emotionally navigating the locker room? I know that, again, you've already dispelled the whole thing of a revenge tour, but obviously I know for you, coming back with what Carolina had done, winning the championship the year before, was there anything about the approach? Again, you've got some pretty experienced seasoned vets, but was there anything about that approach and a concern that the team wanted that playoff revenge just a bit too much?
Yeah, no, not really. We knew that they were, even though they had very familiar faces, they were still a different team than they were the year previous. And as we were also a different team coming in. And, we went in with a extreme confidence in championship weekend that even if Oscar has a bad game, or Jack has a bad game, or Yacht has a bad game, or all three of them have a bad game, there's still a Jeff, there's still a Lithio, there's still the list just keeps going, right? On and on and on. And we know that we had the confidence in ourselves and in our players to just stick with our game plan, and knowing that if you focus too much on the other team, that's when things are going to go wrong. And we just wanted to focus on ourselves and be a little selfish, basically, by just thinking it's all about us. It's not about anybody else. Like we said before, it's not a revenge tour, because what we were doing was we were looking to win a championship. We weren't looking to say, that one slipped out of our hands. It was all about what did we want at the end of the season, what was our end goal, and setting up those small little goals to accomplish that larger goal. And we did all of that.
Well, speaking of that championship game against Chicago, was there a moment in that championship game in particular that you remember and saying, this is us, we've got this one?
Okay, so I can start. I'll start with this. Yeah, I think when we worked it all the way up to the end zone and then worked it all the way back to our own end zone to work it all the way back up and score, running, I
You
forget
mean
how
you
many
mean you mean
minutes.
you mean the thing that made the AUDL want to change the rule? You mean that moment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So the almost the dribbling out of the clock was a point when I'm like, okay, we are extremely, extremely talented and good, but also we just have the control to do what we wanted to do on that field, and there was nobody stopping us there. And as soon as I saw them work it all the way back, I was like, oh, we won this game. Like this, that was the nail in the coffin. Kind of like, yep, we know that we won. Because we ran off, I think it was like 3 minutes or something like that off the
Mhm.
clock, and that was exactly what we needed to do.
Yeah, I think, um, I don't know. Maybe I'm sentimental, but as a line caller, that's the dream scenario. We held there, um, and then we got to put out our um, D1, and then they broke, and then we got to put out our our D2, um, and they broke, and we got to keep the D2 out there with all of those vets we just talked about. We got to have the championship winning pass be Mike Dross to Cat Stevens. People that have been here always, like actually, and yeah, I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, but I like for me that setup, it's uh, it's like an actual dream come true
Yeah.
in terms of like what do I wish for these people is all every player on the field the last time they touched the field got to experience success
Right.
in that season. It was hold, break, and then one more offensive opportunity for or two more offensive opportunities for our second D line, and us with the disc at the end of it. Just like hard to write a better ending for all 20 guys that were playing and for the guys on the sideline supporting. It's just special moment. Emotional about it just thinking about it. I'm a sap.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm gonna change. We're gonna change emotionally. It's like a car. I'm gonna take a total left turn here because we're gonna go into 2023. And no offense to the Empire, but I know retaining an undefeated championship team. It's obviously not to give anything away to Empire fans, but the focus of everybody in the Empire is not to sign 100 more other potential All Stars. It is to retain a championship winning team that went undefeated and continue building a dynasty and building the project that now has won 2 championships in 3 seasons. So, with all that said, it took for one moment, as we mentioned, the buzzer beater against DC, the one moment when it looked like there was a little bit of, you could see the cut, a little bit of blood that the Empire showed last year against DC when when Yacht wins that buzzer beater. And DC, of course, I think you guys have followed the news, right? You saw Joe Merrill is returning, and then Andrew Roy and Cole Jurek are coming from Minnesota. Now, with that, I think, Anthony, when we talk about watching film and things like that, there's one thing to watch the Minnesota wind chill with Jurek and Roy, but it's almost hard to ignore the fact that they already played a club season with many of the DC Breeze players with Truck Stop. And so it's one of those things where the AUDL and the club is so different, but it seems like, unfortunately, for as you guys are trying to do your film, you have to figure out what do we take from Jurek and Roy, Minnesota wind chill players, and then obviously what Joe Merrill did last year in Salt Lake. Is he going to play defense? Add him back to DC? Is he going to be O line where he had 41 goals or something 2 seasons ago with DC? So are you watching wind chill? Are you watching Salt Lake? Are you watching Truck Stop? Or I mean, I guess the answer might be all of it. But yeah, I mean, how are you gearing up for the fact that DC are, as far as the big names, they are kind of punching back when it comes to saying, hey, we are doing our work to strengthen. And if the Empire just retained what they had, obviously, I don't think there's a better 1-2 punch in any division in the league. Not to give my first hot take of the season away, but I'm going to say I got a 95% confident that the winner of the AUDL championship is probably going to come out of the East. That's me saying it. You're the coaches, so you have your own stuff to worry about. But I think the two best teams to start this season, at least at the beginning of the year, are in the East Division.
So yeah, I think what I do is like I said, I watch a ton of Ultimate in general. I know a lot about Andrew Roy and Cole from watching the Witchill games, from watching Truck Stop games. Andrew Roy is actually somebody who I see fitting in the most with the DC Breeze offense, because he can be slotted in and be like a consistent handler, thrower, hockey assist person that takes off some of the weight from Rowan and Johnny. But in Cole is a big body who can obviously have an impact on their offense as well. You know, I'm a big believer, as I said before, in just focusing on us. I know that they're fantastic players. We'll game plan by watching as much, I guess, like truck / Minnesota games, but we also do know that each, like, the systems are still different, and where the Breeze coach Daryl is very good at is adapting and changing strategies year to year, so things don't get stale, and also giving his team the best opportunities to set themselves up to win. So, you know, we can't try to predict the future, but what we can do is we can just watch and try to figure out exactly what roles these players are going to play and what are the matchups that we're going to want with them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't have much to add there. I think.
I mean, you could give the argument as to why Philly is going to get really mad with me. And I listen, I could also still say I still think the ADL champions coming out of the East, and Philly. I mean, you could throw the Phoenix in there too if you want, Charlie.
No, the fact that you asked me a Philly question means that they're going to be mad at me, not you. That's the going.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania too, so it's like, I mean, they don't come after me because I guess I didn't make a lot of decisions.
I'll throw you under the bus then. I think Philly's going to be better. I think Toronto is going to be better. I don't have insight into the other teams, but the fact that we know that 3 other teams are going to be improved in our division is substantial for us, right? And I think, if you look at the season that the Breeze had last year, they were excellent. They were the team that played us the closest. They were one of the best teams in the league in many statistical categories. And then you look what they did in the club season. They nearly won a national title with many of those same personnel, and with a similar coaching staff. And yeah, I mean, they're like a really big threat. They're a big threat, and that's, to me, exciting. That's I don't know. It makes me want to get to work. These signings don't stress me out. They motivate me, and I would assume that that's the case for many of the people across the organization. We know, as Nuñez said, we know that we're also good, and very, very good. And so the fact that these other teams are better, Philly and Toronto and DC, it's exciting for us. It means a different new challenge.
Well, I will mention too that this is, you could argue that Papagiannis moving to LA and these 3, well, the one re-signing and then these 2 big signings for DC, it's kind of the first news breaks, you will, of the off season for the AUDL. So they're not the first. Oh, they are the first, but they certainly won't be the last. I mean, it's going to be, as free agency usually is. I know it's different than other leagues because it has to do with where guys moved for different jobs. You never know why this player popped up on this team. So it's always a whirlwind. And so I'm not saying that the Empire don't have some awesome big name that I'm going to talk to in a few weeks' time. But what we will say is that when you win a championship, again, you're undefeated. So I think a lot of superstars in the Empire, getting them to return and getting them to buy in. And it's tiring to be undefeated, to push as hard as as everybody pushed in the organization. So to recharge the batteries and get all that prepared for the big season number 10, again, the Empire looking to be the first team in AUDL history to win 3 championships. So I do finish up this pod by asking that of you too, because this is now your 3rd season with the organization. And Anthony, you had previously coached at a professional ultimate level in the MLU, so doing New York proud already. And then Charlie, you'd been around Philadelphia for quite a few years as well, around the AUDL and MLU. So as far as this being the 10th year in Empire history and entering your legacy in the name, of course, what were your perceptions of the organization to start, and then how, not only how they changed, that's too easy for you guys, how they changed, you became co-head coaches, but as far as the legacy of the Empire franchise and trying to surmise and sum it up in 10 years, give it your best shot, I'd say.
It's one of the organizations that pushes the sport forward, which is as simple as that. And it's hard to have a bigger and better legacy than that. And I think that goes for on field. I think that goes for the way the organization handles, everything from player treatment all the way over to social media and things like, you, Dan, and this podcast. And I think that the organization is just an absolutely first class one. And it's good to see other teams, sincerest form of flattery is imitation, right? Trying to do the sorts of things that happen in New York with us and this franchise. So, there's obviously a lot of winning associated with the Empire at this point, a lot of stars associated with it, but the organization from top to bottom is one that pushes the sport forward, across the country and across the world. And that's humbling to be a part of. You feel a big responsibility to be a part of something like that.
The way it works is a lot of this starts at the top and then trickles down. The professionalism, the hardworking individuals that are in our Empire offices motivates us to want to have a successful season. Last year we went undefeated, and Paul Stevens had a quote before the playoffs, which I know I truly liked, which was, every other team is chasing a championship, we're chasing history. And that kind of motto to have is exactly what represents the New York Empire. The New York Empire doesn't just want to be a winning franchise. They want to be an historic franchise, something that sets the bar high and keeps that bar at the highest level possible.
Well, I think we can end the show with actually another Paul Stevens quote that the Hot Mics picked up during your championship celebration. And that is Paul Stevens saying to Ben Katz, so how about next year's? How about 2023? And that was 13 minutes after I saw everybody raise the trophy. So the Hot Mics were on, and you're right. From the ownership of Barbara Stevens, of course, the ownership of the team with Barbara, then Paul, and Matt Katz Stevens, of course, and everybody behind the scenes. When I say New York Empire family, not to get a little sappy as well, but when I say New York Empire family, I do truly mean that is what the organization has become. And the idea of family being pushed throughout the league, that obviously the sport of Ultimate and the numbers that I see on this show, and I work in sports behind the scenes otherwise, and Ultimate is still growing. Ultimate is still very much in its infancy, and it is interesting that after just 10 seasons, where the Empire, where the AUDL began 10 years ago, and where it is now, and it's incredible to believe where it could be in 10 years' time, right? Where who knows who is going to define the next decade of Empire history, because we spent a lot of this podcast talking about Cat Stevens and Mike Dross and Ryan Dross, and no disrespect to any of those guys, but I don't think they're going to play as big of a part in the next 10 years as players that they did in the previous 10. But who knows? Mike and Ryan they've been eating candy, and they're Mike's in law school, and they're freak athletes. So I don't know. I don't want to mess with 42-year-old Mike and Ryan Dross in 10 years time. But all that said, yeah, I'm not only glad that the Empire have two of those first 10 championships or 2 of the first 11 in AUDL history, but continuing to make history with you two as co-head coaches. So this is our first big announcement. Like, we'd said all these other names, but we haven't revealed that who is coming back to the show, at least when we're recording this, or at least to the team. So the first announcement is, again, welcome back to the two head coaches, Charlie Hoppes and Anthony Nuñez.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, so thanks to you, the listeners, as well. This wraps up another edition of the show. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and actually come to the games. Come up to New Rochelle, Joseph F. Field, where the season will begin right around the end of April. So get your season tickets and all that stuff as early as you can, and we'll talk to you soon.